Have you ever wondered what Radagast the Brown might have thought of the forging of the Rings of Power? It sounds strange, doesn't it? Linking that absent-minded lover of birds and mushrooms to the fire and fury of the elven forges? But that's exactly where tonight's path begins, somewhere between the soft chatter of thrushes in Rosgobel and the whisper of hammers echoing across Eregion's misty hills. You picture the Anduin below you, rolling wide and slow beneath dawn's silver veil. The world smells of wet stone, pine sap, and the faint tang of distant smoke. Rivendell lies behind you, its waterfalls humming like harps in sleep, and before you the peaks of Khazad-dûm shimmer with the ghost of stars not yet gone from the sky. You probably wouldn't survive this. Honestly, few could, not with what's waiting under those mountains. But then again, that's half the fun of stories like this, isn't it? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm really curious, from which part of the world are you watching this video? Write your country in the comments. Let's see how far this little story has traveled. Somewhere out there, perhaps someone in New Zealand is listening with a cup of tea, or someone in Norway where the fjords look suspiciously like the misty mountains at sunset. Tonight, we're walking through memory more than myth, a tale that begins with curiosity, that oldest of all temptations, and the question of what happens when creation itself turns on its maker. Radagast once said that all things made in love carry their own life. Perhaps Celebrimbor's tragedy began with that same dangerous truth. The air grows cooler now. A soft wind stirs the reeds along the riverbank, and you can almost hear a faint ringing far away, as if some old forge is still alive in the night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into Eregion as though stepping into a dream woven of fire and silver, where the night hums with the heartbeat of molten metal and starlight dances upon the anvils of the Noldor. The forges here do not merely burn, they sing, each hammer strike a note in a symphony of creation that echoes through the caverns and rides the wind across the plains toward Khazad-dûm. The dwarves, your unlikely neighbors, emerge from their mountain halls with lanterns like miniature suns, trading secret smiles and rarer secrets still. They bring mithril dust, fine as frost, and the elves offer gemstones so clear they seem to hold pieces of Varda's own sky. There's laughter between them, real and rare, the kind that makes you forget for a moment that pride often precedes ruin. Canon tells us that in those days, the Gwathi Myrdain, the jewelsmiths, stood unmatched in craft. Their leader, Celebrimbor, grandson of Feanor himself, wielded both genius and ghostly legacy. Some scholars still argue whether the dwarves of Khazad-dûm influenced the forging of the first rings or merely admired from afar. Others whisper that the dwarves lent more than just ore, that they gave warnings too, warnings no one heeded. An obscure text from the Parma Eldalamberon even hints that Celebrimbor once sent a letter to Radagast about the living spirit within certain metals, a riddle suggesting he saw no line between nature and craft. You imagine him, soot-streaked and sleepless, murmuring to the flicker of his forge, convinced that beauty could redeem his bloodline's curse. One night, he holds up a silver band to the firelight, its surface rippling like water, and laughs, quietly, joyfully, a sound that startles the owls outside. It listens, he says to no one. The sound of hammers fades into the slow drip of water, and the chamber smells of iron and wild thyme, of labor and something faintly divine. For a moment you might even believe that creation itself is merciful. But you and I know better. Mercy rarely lingers where ambition takes root. You walk through Eregion's golden streets one late afternoon, when the light seems almost too pure to belong to this world, and the air smells of hot metal and honeysuckle. That's when he comes, a tall figure cloaked in white and confidence, eyes like sunlight through glass, voice as smooth as polished silver. He calls himself Anatar, Lord of Gifts, and the title rolls off his tongue as if it had always belonged to him, which should have been the first warning. The elves welcome him as a friend, for they see grace and knowledge and the promise of new mastery reflected in that ageless face. You watch as Celebrimbor, restless and brilliant, is drawn like a moth to that radiance. Scholars still debate whether Celebrimbor truly believed this stranger divine or whether he simply wanted to. In one obscure draft of Tolkien's letters, it's noted that Annatar offered to teach the deeper arts of making, the kind that require surrender more than skill, and that Celebrimbor's first instinct was suspicion, swiftly overruled by curiosity. That's the thing about curiosity. It walks hand in hand with doom and never notices the cliff ahead. In the forges, the hammers sing again, but now the rhythm has changed. Annatar's voice carries strange undertones. Sometimes you could swear the flame bends toward him. Even Radagast might have sensed it, had he ever set foot here, though between you and me, he'd probably have been too distracted by a particularly talkative squirrel to notice a Maya in disguise. You can almost picture the scene. Annatar leaning over a half-finished ring, whispering about harmony and power. Celebrimbor's hands trembling not from fear but from the thrill of learning something forbidden. The canonical fact stands that Sauron, in this fair form, taught the elves the arts that would forge their doom, but the obscure tidbit few recall is that some early texts describe him experimenting with sound, claiming that every metal had a song only he could hear. The debate still rages among Tolkien scholars, whether that was metaphor or something darker, a trace of the music of the Ainur perverted into manipulation. You, listening now, can almost hear it too. The hum beneath the gold, the faint dissonance that grows each night. The elves feast with their guest, drinking clear wine from crystal cups, laughing, trusting, creating. Celebrimbor writes to Galadriel once, saying he feels closer to the truth of things than ever before, though he doesn't specify what that truth is. 3 small jokes flicker like candlelight in this gathering. First, that even immortal elves love a good shortcut when it comes to crafting. Second, that nobody in Middle-earth ever trusts a man offering free gifts but does so anyway. And third, that Sauron was probably the only guest in history who could ruin a dinner party simply by complimenting the silverware. Outside, the stars begin to rise over the plains of Eregion, and their reflections tremble in the molten pools of the forge. You stand beside Celebrimbor, watching him smile with the unguarded joy of someone who has not yet learned that every gift comes with a hidden chain. A bell tolls far away in Khazad-dûm, deep and mournful, as though the mountains themselves already sense what's coming. And in the silence that follows, a faint wind carries a single whisper through the open window, one you almost recognize as a warning, though it's far too late for anyone to listen. The forges of Eregion burn so hot now that the night itself seems to retreat from them, and you find yourself standing amid a city of sparks, each one a small defiance of darkness. The air hums with the clang of hammers and the scent of molten silver and gold, sharp and sweet as honey on steel. You watch Celebrimbor move like a dancer between furnaces, his every motion measured, his every breath a prayer and a gamble. Annatar stands at his side, patient, smiling faintly, the way a wolf might smile at a shepherd. Canon tells us there were 19 rings forged by elven hands under his instruction, 9 for mortal men, 7 for dwarves, and 3 kept secret even from him. But here, in this moment, they are not yet instruments of power or doom. They are dreams solidified, delicate circles meant to hold beauty itself. One obscure note from the history of Galadriel and Celeborn mentions that each of the 3 was cooled not in water, but in moonlight, because Celebrimbor believed light itself could temper the soul of metal. Another fragment claims that an early prototype shattered, not from weakness, but because it refused the hand of its maker, a poetic way, perhaps, of saying that some creations simply reject pride. Scholars still argue whether the elves sensed Annatar's deceit before the forging was complete or only afterward, when the air itself began to tremble with unseen tension. You can almost hear the debate playing out centuries later in dim university rooms. He must have known, says one. He could not have known, insists another, and between their voices hums the same tragic rhythm that beats beneath every act of creation. But here, now, in the warmth of the forge, the humor of the moment still survives. Celebrimbor wipes soot from his face and mutters something about finally inventing jewelry that lasts longer than a dwarf's patience, earning a rare laugh from Narvi, who replies that no elf could outshine dwarven craftsmanship even if they had 1,000 years and an instruction manual from the Veiler. Anatar chuckles too, lightly, politely, and that should have chilled the blood, though no one notices. You might even joke that this is Middle-earth's first recorded instance of a collaboration gone wrong. One more jest flickers in the fire. A young apprentice tries on a ring before it cools and yelps as it scorches his finger. Proof, Celebrimbor teases, that power should always be handled hot. The rhythm of the forge grows hypnotic, a heartbeat echoing through metal and stone. You lean closer, feeling the heat press against your skin, and sense the living pulse of the rings themselves, each humming with a faint voice, whispering not words, but intent. Anatar tells them to think of preservation, to bind the world against decay. He speaks of beauty eternal, of gardens that never fade, of cities forever unstained by time. The elves listen, enraptured, believing him. Yet if you tilt your head just right, beneath the music of the forge, you might hear another note, dissonant, low, like the rumble of the sea in storm. It's the echo of something deeper, older, uninvited. A canonical truth remains. The moment the One Ring was forged in secret, all others felt it. What the tales often skip is that the elves first sensed a faint pain in their hands, as though the very metal rebelled against its purpose. Some obscure lore masters claim that the three shone momentarily with light so bright it scorched the walls of Eregion's forges, forcing the smiths to cover their eyes. Others say that a silence fell, utter and unnatural, before every flame flared white. And so, the first great debate of Eregion began. Did the rings possess will, or were they merely mirrors of their makers' hearts? The scholars never settled that question, but you, standing in the imaginary glow of those fires, might guess the answer. Both. You think of Radagast again, that absent-minded wanderer who once said that even the smallest creature can carry the weight of the world in its paws. Perhaps, if he had wandered into this forge, he would have shaken his head and said, "You know, this feels like too much magic for one valley." He'd probably have been right. The air thickens. You can almost smell the forewarning. Ozone, ash, the ghost of something burning far away that hasn't yet begun to burn here. Still, Celebrimbor smiles, holding one ring aloft in the furnace light, its surface like captured dawn. For a fleeting instant, he looks peaceful, almost innocent. Then the fire flickers blue, and Anatar's reflection inside the metal shifts. Not fair, not kind, but vast and cold, as if the world itself has just taken a sharp breath. You feel that same breath too, through time, through story, through the hum of creation teetering on the edge of its own destruction. You walk again through the avenues of Eregion, and they are different now. Brighter, louder, and strangely hollow, as if the forges have begun to sing louder than the people. The rings gleam in velvet-lined boxes, and the streets smell of molten gold, pine resin, and victory. You can almost taste the sweetness of it, that pride that hums just beneath the tongue, like the edge of too much honey in your tea. The elves speak of a new age of preservation, of guarding beauty against time, and you can hear Celebrimbor's laughter ringing above it all, echoing like a bright hammer strike against the silence of fate. He moves among his smiths like a conductor before an orchestra, the heat of the forges gilding his hair, his face alight with something that looks too much like joy. But joy in Middle-earth rarely comes without a price tag, and you and I both know the Valar's refund policy is terrible. There's a line from the Ainulindala, obscure and half-lost, that says, "Even the purest flame yearns for shadow, lest it consume itself." Tonight, that feels less like poetry and more like prophecy. He dreams in metal now. Each night, he lies awake in his workshop, unable to sleep for the ringing in his ears, a rhythm that feels almost like a heartbeat. His fingers twitch in his sleep, shaping invisible circles in the air. The canonical fact you can't ignore is that Celebrimbor descended from Feanor, the maker of the Silmarils, and inherited both his gift and his madness. The curse of firecraft runs through his bloodline like a forgotten melody, beautiful but unbearable. The obscure tidbit most miss is found in an early Lambengolmor scroll, where a scholar wrote that Celebrimbor once believed he could tame light itself, bending it through crystal so that it obeyed his will. Some historians say this experiment birthed the idea of the three rings, the desire to contain what should never be caged. And so begins tonight's debate. Was his downfall Sauron's corruption, or his own pride disguised as nobility? In a small courtyard behind his forge, a fountain trickles over mithril runes. You watch him sit beside it, hands trembling slightly as he polishes a silver circlet that hums softly like a sleeping creature. His apprentice, Lariel, asks him if he ever worries about what they're creating. He smiles and says, "All beauty is dangerous, but so is time." Then he adds, half-jokingly, "Besides, what's the worst that could happen? A few cursed kingdoms, a ghost or two?" And you almost laugh, though you wish you couldn't. Humor clings to him like the last ember before the dark, a smith's defiance against dread. There's a story whispered among the dwarves of Khazad-dûm that when Celebrimbor came to them for aid, Narvi warned him that not all fire was friendly. "Stone remembers heat," Narvi supposedly said, "but it cracks when the heart of flame grows proud." Some claim that line never existed, that it's just a late addition by third-age poets who loved irony too much. Still, it feels true in your bones, doesn't it? Pride always sounds noble before it's named. Meanwhile, Anatar moves quietly through the forges, his smile unchanged. He doesn't instruct anymore. He suggests, and his words fall like embers that never quite die. "Think of harmony," he tells Celebrimbor, "not domination, preservation." The words shimmer with double meaning, but no one notices. After all, who questions the god of gifts when the world itself seems brighter in his presence? You, standing unseen in the forge's glow, want to shout a warning, but your voice would be swallowed by the music of molten gold. At night, Celebrimbor writes to Galadriel again. The letter doesn't survive in canon, but Tolkien once mentioned a lost correspondence between them in which she cautioned him about a shadow that teaches too sweetly. You imagine her words as you listen to the forge's hum. "Be wary of the flame that flatters its keeper." He probably read that line, chuckled softly, and tucked it into his pocket. Pride doesn't announce itself. It hums, seduces, and convinces you that you're saving the world. Now here's your trio of light-hearted truths, tucked between tragedy and theology. First, no elf ever made a masterpiece without forgetting at least one meal, one friend, and one good night's sleep. Second, Celebrimbor reportedly told an apprentice, "If the Valar wanted humility, they'd have given us shorter lifespans." And third, the dwarves joked that if the elves kept forging any hotter, they'd set the stars on fire, and honestly, they weren't far off. The canonical debate deepens. Some scholars insist that when Sauron's deceit was revealed, the three rings recoiled from him, acting as living extensions of their maker's spirit, almost as if they'd inherited Celebrimbor's own fear and defiance. Others argue that they were neutral, mere vessels, and that it was Galadriel, Elrond, and Gandalf who gave them moral shape. But an obscure fragment in Home 12 implies that Celebrimbor embedded within them something akin to the secret fire, the same divine spark Ilúvatar gave the Ainur, a dangerous imitation of creation's source. If that's true, then perhaps his sin wasn't pride alone, but trespass, the attempt to mirror godhood in mortal hands. You lean closer to the forge now, and the sound changes. Beneath the metallic rhythm, a faint echo rises. Not a hammer, but a heartbeat, deep and steady. The heat licks your skin like a warning. The air smells of ozone and regret. Celebrimbor doesn't notice. He's lost in his trance, his eyes reflecting gold and madness. In that glow, you see all of him, the craftsman, the heir, the orphan of Feanor's fire. He believes he's preserving beauty, but what he's really doing is imprisoning it, wrapping eternity in precious metal and calling it mercy. Somewhere, maybe even now, Radagast would sigh and say, "You can't cage the wind, my friend." And perhaps Celebrimbor would have smiled, wiped his brow, and said, "Watch me." By dawn, the forges fall silent. The rings rest upon black velvet, still warm to the touch. You hear a whisper, faint as smoke. They remember who made them. And for a moment, you understand why the story was never just about power. It was about the loneliness of creation, the unbearable ache of wanting the world to stay beautiful forever, even if it means binding it in gold. But beauty, as the Valar know too well, resists chains. The dawn comes harsh and gray, and for the first time, Eregion feels colder than Khazad-dûm. Somewhere beyond the misty mountains, thunder murmurs, soft, almost affectionate, like a promise that the storm has already begun. You descend through the echoing tunnels that link Eregion to Khazad-dûm, and the first thing that greets you is the smell, iron, smoke, and the faint sweetness of crushed moss clinging to the stones. The sound follows, the deep, steady rhythm of hammers in the dark, a music older than any elven song. Here, under the mountains, the world feels solid and honest. Stone does not lie, though it remembers everything. You carry with you a sealed message from Celebrimbor, bound in silver thread, and it trembles faintly in your hands as if it already knows that this alliance between elf and dwarf will soon be tested by something greater than greed or pride. The dwarves meet you with wary courtesy. Narvi himself, his beard braided with copper wire, greets you at the great doors of Moria, the runes glimmering faintly like fireflies on metal. His eyes narrow when he reads the letter. Celebrimbor asks for counsel, not trade. He speaks of shadows moving eastward, of whispers that Anatar's smile hides something neither mortal nor divine. Narvi laughs, but it's a laugh that sounds rehearsed. If the elves have finally learned to distrust beauty, he says, it's about time. That's your first joke of the night, an old dwarven proverb disguised as sarcasm. The forges beneath the mountain burn low. Even the flames seem to listen. It's here, in these halls of red stone and ringing anvils, that the first rumors of betrayal take root. The canonical fact, the dwarves of Khazad-dûm were the only people who refused Anatar's teachings. They traded with Eregion, yes, but never allowed him through their gates. The obscure tidbit, an early note from the treason of Isengard, mentions a dwarven rune, Khaz-rul, meaning forbidden fire, which they carved above their forges after Anatar's visits began. Scholars debate what it meant. Some say it was a warding charm, others that it marked the first attempt to name the growing dread. The debate still rages today. Did the dwarves sense Sauron's nature, or did they merely distrust outsiders by tradition? Either way, Narvi watches you carefully, as if searching for some reflection of that fair stranger's light in your eyes. He takes you deeper into Khazad-dûm, past molten rivers and pillars carved with stories of Durin's awakening. The air vibrates with craftsmanship. Every chisel mark seems to hum with pride. Narvi speaks quietly as you walk. "We've seen gifts before," he says. "They're always chains, just polished ones." You glance toward a wall where mithril veins gleam like captured starlight, and you remember what Celebrimbor once said, that the dwarves' hearts beat with the same rhythm as the earth's. It was meant as praise, but Narvi chuckled when he heard it. "We're not the earth," he'd said. "We just keep it from forgetting us." A second wry truth for tonight. Dwarves might be stubborn, but they're rarely wrong. A messenger arrives from the east, a man of strange accent, his cloak torn by wind and ash. He carries word of towers rising beyond the sea of Rune, of a new power calling smiths to its service with promises of knowledge unending. When he says the name Anatar, the hall falls silent. Narvi's face hardens, and he mutters something about elves inviting storms, then wondering why it rains. That's your third joke. Bitterness wrapped in prophecy. He warns you to tell your master to watch his forges, to keep his secrets close. Stone can be reforged, Narvi says, but trust, once cracked, never holds. When you return to Eregion, you find the air different. The songs of the smiths sound thinner, strained. Annatar is gone, vanished like a dream at dawn. The apprentices whisper that he's traveling east to gather knowledge. Celebrimbor shrugs, pretending calm, but his eyes betray sleepless nights. He paces before his forge, muttering about equilibrium, about harmony and decay. You can tell he feels it, the imbalance. The rings are no longer just artifacts. They're humming with energy that shouldn't exist. In the silence between hammer blows, the walls seem to breathe. Scholars today still debate the timeline, how long it took for Celebrimbor to realize that the music he heard in metal was not Iluvatar's harmony, but Sauron's echo. Some say it was immediate, that he felt the corruption like a knife between his thoughts. Others claim it came gradually, disguised as perfection. There's even a controversial theory that Celebrimbor tried to use the flaw, to bind Sauron's power for good, an act that would make him both victim and accomplice. Tolkien never confirmed it, but the fragments fit too neatly to dismiss. As dusk settles, you walk to the edge of Eregion's borders. The wind carries the smell of iron and coming rain. In the distance, Khazad-dûm's western gate glows faintly like an ember in the mountain's heart. You think of Narvi's words, of that laughter hiding fear. Somewhere deep in the stone, perhaps, the dwarves are already sealing passages, whispering old prayers that even elves never learned. And perhaps in Rosgobel, Radagast feels a sudden chill in his cottage, his sparrows going silent for a heartbeat before resuming their chatter. He'd probably frown, scratch his beard, and murmur, "Something's gone wrong with the wind again." The night grows colder. In the forges, Celebrimbor works alone now, the firelight flickering across his face like ghosts of old stars. He touches the 3 rings he forged in secret, Narya, Nenya, Vilya, and for a fleeting moment they shine like hope itself. Then the light fades, and a shadow passes across the door, unseen but certain. The air trembles. Somewhere deep beneath the earth, the hammers of Khazad-dûm stop mid-swing, as though the mountain itself is holding its breath. You wake to the sound of thunder that isn't thunder, metal striking metal, screams threaded through the roar of fire. Eregion burns. The dawn never comes. It's drowned beneath smoke and shadow, and the light that once danced across the forges now blazes red, furious, alive with ruin. You stand in the streets of Ost-in-Edhil, the great city of the jewelsmiths, and it feels like watching beauty collapse under its own reflection. Celebrimbor's towers, those slender silver marvels, crack and bow as flame eats their ribs. The air smells of melted gold, blood, and rain that will never fall. You try to move, but every step sticks to the ash, the ground trembling beneath your boots like a heart gone mad. From the east, Sauron's armies pour in, a tide of iron and hatred, and the cry goes up that Annatar has returned, but not as a teacher, not as a friend. The fair voice that once charmed elves into creation now orders their unmaking. You glimpse him across the smoke, unmasked, a shadow of impossible height crowned by fire. Canon tells us that Sauron's assault on Eregion was swift and merciless, and that the elves were unprepared. But there's an obscure scrap from the War of the Elves and Sauron that suggests otherwise, that Celebrimbor had prepared defenses of light, mirrors that could bend sunlight into flame, runes inscribed on glass that would shatter under evil touch. The scholars still debate whether these inventions were legend or fact, but tonight, as towers crumble, you see the glint of mirrored fire slicing through darkness. So perhaps there was truth in those forgotten notes. The clangor deepens, rhythmic and merciless. The forges themselves explode as the heat meets oil and air. The song of Eregion ends in one final discordant chord. You find Celebrimbor at the gates of his workshop, the 3 rings wrapped in silk and pressed against his chest. His hands are burned, his face streaked with soot and grief. "He has the one," he says quietly, more to himself than to you. "I felt it." That's your canonical fact. The moment Sauron forged the One Ring, the elves perceived it and knew they were betrayed. but the obscure rumor follows like a ghost, that for a heartbeat the three resisted, shining so brightly they seared Sauron's sight, forcing him to retreat for a moment of blind rage. Whether true or myth, you can feel it here, the pulse of defiance, brief as lightning. Celebrimbor's smiths fight like poets of fire, hurling molten metal and broken blades against legions of orcs. Narvi's warning rings in your ears. Stone remembers heat, but it cracks when the heart of flame grows proud. And indeed, the marble streets of Eregion crack, glowing from beneath as if magma itself wants to swallow the city whole. Amid the chaos, you hear laughter, bitter, wild, unmistakably dwarvish. Narvi and his kin have come through the mountain tunnels to help, though they know the battle is already lost. "You elves build too tall!" he shouts, cutting through a line of orcs with a swing that could split a tree. "Too much to fall!" It's gallows humor, sharp and brave, and it almost breaks your heart. Scholars still argue about how much time passed between Sauron's first assault and the final fall. Days, weeks, or mere hours. But the truth feels immediate. You move through streets that no longer exist, stepping over broken jewels, twisted instruments of craft, fragments of beauty turned weapon. The rain begins to fall, black, oily, hissing as it hits the fires. Somewhere above, a bell tolls once and then collapses, its song ending in a shatter that echoes all the way to Khazad-dûm. You think of Radagast far away, maybe standing under a quiet sky, hearing this faint sound through the whisper of his trees and not understanding what dies with it. Celebrimbor runs to the western courtyard where a small fountain still flows, unburned by the heat. There he kneels, unwraps the silk, and lifts the three rings to the sky. "Hide them," he whispers, his voice barely audible. "Hide them from me." You can almost see Galadriel's pale reflection in the water, as if she already knows what must be done. The debate among Tolkien scholars is endless. Did she receive Nenya before or after the fall? Or did Celebrimbor entrust it to her in a vision rather than by hand? The text is unclear, perhaps mercifully so. What matters is the choice, the relinquishment of what he loves most. The walls shudder. Sauron's voice fills the air, deep as a bell struck inside the bones of the world. It's not words you understand, but intent. Command and grief fused into one impossible sound. The dwarves retreat toward the mountain, urging the surviving elves to follow. Celebrimbor does not. "Go," he tells you, eyes fixed on the forge's door. "There are things worth losing, and things worth keeping. I will guard the difference." You hesitate, wanting to protest, but something in his gaze silences you. He turns back to the fire, the rings gone from his hands, and for a moment, his face glows, not with fear, but with clarity. This, you realize, is the curse of his hands. They were made to create and therefore condemned to destroy. You flee as the city collapses behind you, running through a rain of sparks that turn the air into molten daylight. The wind howls through the ruins, carrying fragments of elvish songs broken mid-verse. Somewhere in the smoke, a raven circles and disappears. When you reach the ridge above Eregion, you look back. The city is gone, replaced by a single smoldering glow that fades slowly, like the last ember of a forge gone cold. The dwarves close the western gate of Khazad-dûm and carve a new rune upon it, Khazrul, forbidden fire. You stand in the dark, chest heaving, your hands shaking as though the weight of every ring still clings to them. And somewhere, deep in the heart of that dying city, the forges pulse once more, just for an instant. One last spark, one final heartbeat of defiance. It's not mercy, it's memory, and then it too goes dark. You return to Eregion weeks later, though it no longer deserves the name. Only ruins remain, and silence so heavy it feels like ash has learned to breathe. The city's bones are blackened, its forges collapsed inward like hollow stars. You pick your way through the wreckage, careful not to disturb the brittle rings of gold melted into the cobblestones. It smells of rain, soot, and something faintly sweet, like sap from trees burned too young. In the distance, crows wheel over the remnants of the Hall of Myrdain, their cries slicing through the quiet. Beneath them, Sauron's banners flutter in the wind, and among the prisoners chained before the fallen forge, you see him, Celebrimbor, bound but unbroken. His hands, those hands that once held creation itself, are scorched, trembling, yet still beautiful in their ruin. The guards call him Curanir's ghost, the ghost of the craftsman, and even they avoid meeting his eyes. Canon tells us that Sauron captured Celebrimbor, tortured him for the locations of the three rings, and slew him when he refused. But the obscure detail, buried in the annals of Eregion, says that during those long nights, Sauron didn't just want information, he wanted imitation. He tried to force Celebrimbor to forge new rings in mockery of the old, and when the elf refused, he broke every finger one by one until even the forges wept. The debate among scholars remains fierce. Did Celebrimbor die in defiance or madness? Was his silence courage or surrender to despair? You can't know, but standing here, you feel the air hum with a strange echo, as though the mountain still remembers the rhythm of his screams. Sauron moves among the ruins like a shadow made flesh. He no longer wears beauty. The illusion has fallen, and now the air warps where he walks, the ground hissing beneath his feet. He lifts Celebrimbor's ruined hand with something like pity, mocking, tender, monstrous. These hands could have saved the world, he murmurs, if only they'd obeyed. And Celebrimbor, in a voice ragged as torn silk, replies, "If obedience built your world, may it burn." It's not in canon, of course. No scholar would dare invent dialogue for a dying elf, but it fits too perfectly to ignore. The first joke of this dark hour hides in that defiance, that even facing annihilation, an elf will still correct your aesthetic philosophy. They string him from the high tower of Ost-in-Edhil, his body displayed as a banner before the gates. That part is canonical, though seldom described aloud. But an obscure legend adds a crueler flourish, that his blood, falling on the anvil below, hardened into black crystal, later mistaken by men for obsidian. Dwarves call it Doomgal, the smith's sorrow, and some still wear shards of it as talismans against deceit. The debate among historians continues whether these relics were real or poetic invention, but in Middle-earth, poetry and truth often share the same forge. And here lies the strangest whisper of all. Some say that after death, his spirit lingered. Not in Valinor, he was too stained for that, but in the veins of Mithril that threaded Khazad Dûm, bound to the metal he once loved. Miners in the Third Age claimed that sometimes, when striking too deep, they'd hear faint hammering far below, a rhythm older than stone, patient and proud. One miner even swore he heard a voice whisper, "Not again," before the tunnel collapsed. You can almost believe it, can't you? The curse of creation. To echo beyond the body, to make the world remember your mistakes. There's another canonical detail most forget. Before his capture, Celebrimbor sent messengers with the three rings to safety, Nenya to Galadriel, Vilya to Gil-galad, Narya to Círdan. But here's the obscure truth scholars rarely mention. One of those messengers was a half-Dúnedain apprentice named Meluin, who vanished on the road and was never found. A single unfinished note in the Lost Tales implies he may have been taken alive to Mordor and forced to assist in binding lesser rings, a chilling suggestion that even fragments of Celebrimbor's craft were twisted into Sauron's dominion. The debate, as always, circles endlessly. Did Sauron's power corrupt the rings, or did the rings amplify corruption already present in those who bore them? No one knows. Perhaps both are true. Still, amid despair, there are flickers of wit left, like dying sparks under ash. One surviving elf, when asked years later how Celebrimbor faced death, said dryly, with more sarcasm than most saints. Another account claims he laughed once, softly, when Sauron demanded to know the hiding place of the three. "You'll never find them," he said, "because they're where your reflection cannot go." Some say that line infuriated Sauron so deeply that he tore down every mirror in Eregion before departing. That's your second and third joke combined. humor as rebellion, irony as armor. When the smoke clears and Sauron marches east with his spoils, you're left standing amid a silence so complete it feels like judgment. You reach down and pick up a sliver of mithril, half melted, faintly warm. It hums, ever so softly, and for a moment you swear you hear a single hammer strike. Far away, somewhere beneath the mountains. Radagast, were he here, would probably blink, tilt his head, and say something like, "The earth remembers kindness, even if the sky doesn't." But you, holding that shard, understand it differently. It isn't kindness that endures, it's regret. As dusk falls, Khazad-dûm's doors remain shut, sealed from the world. A few elves linger at the edge of the valley, their faces hollow with grief. One begins to sing, not in triumph or mourning, but as if to remind the stars that beauty existed here once. The melody is old, fragile, and yet as it rises into the night, you feel something impossible. The faint warmth of the forges stirring beneath the earth, as if even in death, the smith still shapes the story. The curse of Celebrimbor's hands endures, not in vengeance, but in creation's refusal to end. Somewhere, in the stillness between heartbeats, the echo lingers. If obedience built your world, may it burn. And for a moment, even the stars seem to listen. You walk through the fading years of the Second Age, when the fire of Eregion has cooled into memory, and the world pretends to have learned its lesson. The lands once scarred by flame have softened with grass, and wildflowers bloom where forges once bled light into the night. The air is gentle again, too gentle perhaps, as if the wind itself avoids the name Celebrimbor. Yet nothing in Middle-earth ever truly ends. Every ruin is a seed. You can feel it here, beneath your feet, the faint hum of something enduring, forged into the very rhythm of the earth. In Gondor's archives, scribes will later argue whether redemption can reach those who defied the Valar. One, a poet of Numenor named Eregion, wrote that beauty sinned through pride, yet repented through endurance. That's a fancy way of saying that even broken hands can build hope if time lets them. Centuries pass and stories scatter. The canonical truth, the three rings, survive. Nenya rests upon Galadriel's finger in Lothlorien, gleaming like starlight caught in frost. Vilya, the ring of air, becomes Elrond's charge in Rivendell, where it guards peace for generations. Narya, the ring of fire, passes to Círdan and then to Gandalf, who carries it like a spark of rebellion against despair. But here's the obscure lore hidden in the gray annals. All three rings occasionally hum in harmony during moments of great world change, as though echoing their maker's heartbeat through time. Some scholars suggest that each ring inherited one fragment of Celebrimbor's soul, his longing, his pride, and his mercy, and that together they form what Elrond once called the whisper of forgiveness. Whether that's metaphor or metaphysics, no one agrees. Still, when you imagine those rings glowing in secret as the world darkens again, it's hard not to think he's still watching, still crafting redemption in silence. You travel next to Lothlorien. The air smells of Malorn blossoms, and the leaves shimmer like sunlight filtered through dreams. Galadriel stands by the mirror, the ring Nenya glinting like moonlight on ice. Her face is calm, but her eyes, those eyes hold a sorrow you recognize. She speaks softly, and though you cannot hear the words, you sense the weight of memory in them. Perhaps she's talking to him. Perhaps the mirror remembers his reflection, faint and far away, somewhere between fire and forgiveness. The scholarly debate about her connection to Celebrimbor still divides Tolkien experts. Some say they shared kinship through craft. Others whisper of affection, of two souls bound by loss. It doesn't really matter now. What matters is that through her, his work endures. Not as vanity, but as protection, beauty turned to refuge. In Rivendell, you watch Elrond work quietly among his scrolls, the sound of quills and water mingling like rain on stone. Vilya rests on his hand, subtle but alive. He does not flaunt it. He never could. He learned from his ancestors' ruin. Every time he uses the ring, he feels the echo of its forging, the heat, the terror, the song that once promised eternity. And yet he uses it still, not to preserve his pride, but to preserve peace. That's the strange grace of Celebrimbor's curse. His failure taught others how to wield power gently. Your first soft joke comes as you watch Gandalf fumble with Narya. He stares at it with suspicion, muttering, "I never did trust jewelry," before using it to light a pipe instead of a revolution. The second joke follows as Elrond sighs at yet another council meeting, wondering aloud whether anyone ever listens to a ring-bearer until it's far too late. And the third belongs to Galadriel, who, when asked by Celeborn whether she ever tires of immortality, replies, "Only on days that end in Y." Even immortals need levity. Humor is how they remind themselves they're still alive. You pass through these havens of grace and see the quiet inheritance of a broken smith. His craftsmanship, meant to bind beauty, now guards it gently. Yet the world beyond the forests stirs with new darkness. The canonical record continues. Sauron rises again. The Second Age collapses into war, and the last alliance marches upon Mordor. Gil-galad and Elendil fall. Isildur takes the One Ring. But deep within the chaos of fire and fate, there's a single echo that historians rarely mention, a rumor found in the Lay of Lost Forges, a poem long forgotten, describing a vision Elrond once had before the final battle. In it, he dreams of a hand of flame reaching out of shadow, touching his ring not in threat, but in farewell. Some interpret it as divine blessing, others as memory, Celebrimbor's last act, giving permission to let go. And so redemption lingers not as triumph, but as endurance. You find it in the glint of mithril mail, in the patience of dwarves who still carve in silence, in the way elven songs carry sorrow like perfume instead of poison. Even Radagast, far away in his tangled woods, feels it now. He sits beside his birds, sipping tea from a chipped cup, and mutters, "There's a new warmth in the wind." He doesn't know why, of course. He just smiles, lets a thrush perch on his finger, and hums a tune that sounds suspiciously like hammer beats softened by distance. There's a debate still whispered among lore masters. Was Celebrimbor forgiven? Did Mandos ever call his spirit home? Or did he wander forever in the veins of Middle-earth, hammering unseen but eternal? You'll never know, and that's all right. Because redemption, in the end, is not about return. It's about resonance. Every act of kindness in the ages that follow carries his rhythm. Every crafted blade that saves instead of kills hums with his defiance. His cursed hands, once the source of ruin, have become instruments of memory. You look west as the sun dips behind the misty mountains, and the clouds turn red like cooling embers. The wind carries a low sound, almost like metal singing to itself. Maybe it's only the breeze, maybe it's him. Either way, it's a sound that belongs to no god and no curse, just to creation trying again. You smile faintly and whisper, "He's still at his forge." The river answers with ripples of light, and for a moment, Middle-earth feels at peace. You arrive once more in Eregion, long after the fires have died and the world has turned its grief into legend. What remains is silence, yet not the kind that frightens. This silence breathes, stretches, and folds itself gently around the ruins as if the land itself were keeping vigil. The grass has returned, though it grows pale and thin among the blackened stones. A single river, unnamed on any map, flows through what was once Ost-in-Edhil's heart, its water tracing the paths where molten silver once ran. You kneel beside it and listen. The water hums faintly as though remembering. That is how history works here, not as story or scripture, but as music heard only by those who stop long enough to hear it. You run your hand through the current, cool against your skin, and the ripples distort the reflection of the sky until the stars look like sparks from a dying forge. Time softens even curses. The canonical truth says that nothing of Eregion's glory survived save ruins and the faint shimmer of the rings that escaped. Yet the obscure lore from the scrolls of Yavanna suggests that tiny seeds once buried by the elves before the fall still bloom here each spring. Silver flowers that open only at night, said to glow with the tears of Aula. Whether that's myth or mercy, it's beautiful to believe, and maybe that's all belief needs to be. The scholars, of course, still debate, was Celebrimbor's curse a punishment from the Valar, or simply consequence, the world's way of reminding its makers that even beauty must bend to time? You suspect the truth lies somewhere in between, the same way metal bends before it breaks. You sit upon a broken step, the moon washing the stones in light soft as breath. Somewhere beyond the hills, Rivendell's waterfalls murmur in their endless descent, and from far west, the faint cry of a gull carries across the wind, like a memory of shores you've never seen. The night is wide, clear, and forgiving. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you can almost hear him. The rhythmic clang of hammer against anvil, faint as a heartbeat beneath the earth. Each strike is slower now, not driven by ambition, but by rhythm alone. Craft for its own sake, creation without desire. Perhaps this is how redemption truly sounds. Radagast would probably say something charmingly misplaced, like, "Ah, the winds learned to whistle again," before offering you a cup of tea that somehow tastes of pine cones and nostalgia. You smile at the thought. Even he would understand that the world endures because it forgets just enough to keep loving itself again. That's the final humor in all this. 3 small jokes carried on starlight. First, that every age in Middle-earth believes it's the last. Second, that elves think tragedy makes them interesting. And third, that no matter how often the forge burns, someone always comes along to rebuild it, convinced they'll do it better this time. And maybe, just maybe, that's the point. You breathe deeply. The air is cool, heavy with the scent of stone and river moss. The night sky above you spills over with stars, the same stars that watched the birth of the Silmarils, the forging of the rings, the fall of kings, and the rise of shepherds. Their light touches everything equally, refusing to choose between sinner and saint. The curse of Celebrimbor's hands dissolves here, not by forgiveness, but by simple continuation. His work endures, not in gold or power, but in the way a craftsman's ghost lingers in every act of making, every carved staff, every polished gem, every quiet act of care that shapes the world into something better. That's his echo, softened by time, freed at last from fire. And so the story ends, as all true stories of Middle-earth must, with silence made sacred by endurance. The river moves, the stars pulse, and the wind carries the faint scent of forge smoke long vanished. Somewhere deep beneath the earth, a final hammer strike fades into peace, and you realize the tale was never about the curse at all. It was about persistence, the stubborn kindness of creation itself. You open your eyes, let the starlight spill across your palms, and exhale. "Good night, Smith," you whisper. The words vanish into the cool air, carried downriver toward the sea. Now, let the world rest a little. Let the water keep singing to the stones. Let the forges dream beneath the hills, and let the stars hold what memory can't. You've walked far enough for one night. The embers are gone. Only the glow remains, soft, patient, eternal. Breathe with it once more, and let the sound of the river become your heartbeat. The story has folded into stillness. You are safe now, wrapped in the hum of Middle-earth's sleep.